This is one of the most unusual graveyards I've ever been in. I'm Jessica, the museum guide, and today I'm at Greyfriars Kirk and Kirkyard here in Edinburgh, Scotland, one of the most unusual graveyards in the world, to explore this place of the dead, as well as the famous church that occupies the site.
Now, on our tour today, we're going to be exploring the history of the churchyard, the church itself, a lot of really interesting individuals. Of course, we'll see Greyfriars Bobby, and even discuss whether some of these graves inspired Harry Potter. We're going to start by talking about a famous poltergeist and a game of football played with a human skull, and then move into a history of the Kirk itself. Afterwards, we're going to head back outside and really have a look at the graves and monuments, learning about dark times in Scottish history, a lot of interesting symbolism that we'll find on the graves, debunk some myths and legends, and dive into some medical history, including the body snatchers, and ways that local people in Edinburgh tried to prevent their loved ones from being dug back up. I'll be joined for a lot of the tour today by one of Greyfriars' amazing parishioners and volunteers, Bert. I'll let him introduce himself.
My name's Bert Hutchings. I've been coming to this church for the best part of 50 years, and I've found all the history and both church history and social history are associated with the building enormously interesting, and I just love the way it threads together, how one thing leads to another.
If you're new to my channel, welcome. I'm delighted to have you here, and I really hope that you choose to stick around, like, comment, subscribe, and all that. If you're a regular viewer and you'd like even more tours, join my Patreon channel, which is just linked below. There, I release one extra tour every single month just for my patrons, as well as send invitations for an annual in-person tour. It's November, but it's really unseasonably warm, and there are so many tours here. Harry Potter tours, ghost tours, history tours. This is said to be the most haunted churchyard, but that's not why we're here today. We're here for the real history.
Imagine my surprise when I started researching this wonderful church and its atmospheric kirkyard, and found that most videos and links on YouTube and elsewhere are about how it is, quote, the most haunted churchyard in the country. Now, I don't know about all that. Regular viewers know that as much as I love the macabre and the spooky, I simply don't believe in ghosts. I wish I did. Sometimes I really do, but to me, what makes this place so very special is its remarkable history and its moody, very moody, vibes. Well, this is one of the most famous tombs here at Greyfriars, that of Sir George MacKenzie, also known as George Bloody MacKenzie, the Covenanters' judge. Now, a bit later on, we're going to talk about the Covenanters at length, but for now, you need to know just how cruel and unjust this period of time in the 17th century was. And Bloody MacKenzie was the judge that sentenced many Covenanters to their death. Some people say that the spirit of George MacKenzie causes bruising, bites, and cuts when they touch this tomb. I didn't experience any of that. However, his tomb was in the media not too long ago. Oh my gosh, okay, this was actually more than 20 years ago now. But in 2003, it was entered by two teenage boys, aged 17 and 15. They broke into this tomb via a ventilation slot in the rear, which is now sealed. They reached the lower vault that contains the coffins, broke the coffins open, and stole a skull. Can you believe that they were playing football with the skull? I know this sounds like an urban legend, but I promise it's not. Police arrived as they were playing football with the skull on the grass. The pair were charged on a little used but still existing charge of violating a sepulchre. I never say this, but kids these days, man, or I guess they're closer to my age, kids those days. Let's just pause for a moment and talk about the Scots word Kirk. The word Kirk is a dialectical variant of church. It comes from the Old Norse word Kirkja, and it's also found in northern England due to the Danish settlements there during the Viking times. Here in Scotland, the Kirk can also be used as the informal name for the Church of Scotland. One more note. I'm saying the word Scots, not Scotch. Scotch is a drink, not a term for Scottish people. Scots is a West Germanic language variety descended from early Middle English. It's a sister language of modern English, but it is linguistically separate.
Let's talk a little bit about the history of the kirk itself.
Greyfriars traces its origins to the southwest parish of Edinburgh, founded in 1598. The name Greyfriars comes from the observant Franciscans, aka the Grey Friars, who arrived in Edinburgh from the Netherlands in the mid-15th century. They were granted land for a Catholic friary at the southwestern edge of the walled city. Friars were members of a mendicant religious order who took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. However, unlike monks who usually lived in seclusions, friars were itinerant, which means they lived amongst and preached to the public. And you could tell the different friars apart from the color of their cassocks, but I'll let Bert tell you a little bit more as we walk around here.
Well, actually, to call them Greyfriars, we're tripping across a change in the English language from that time. If it didn't have a heraldic name, I wasn't used in coats of arms and things, it tended to just be called grey, which you could say meant dull or muddy. Brown would have been loosely referred to as grey, one of those dull bunch. So the Greyfriars were the dull-coloured brothers, even though their robes were more brownish than what we would call grey. But as I say, the words in that time.
So the friars are here, but then, from 1525, figures like John Knox, a Scottish theologian and minister, were influenced by Martin Luther and espoused his Protestant doctrine. It rapidly became popular, and in 1560, a group of Scottish nobles, known as the Lords of the Congregation, gained control of the government. They quickly passed legislation that rejected papal supremacy. Scotland officially became a Protestant country, a far more Calvinist and austere form of Protestantism than in the Church of England, which many considered too Catholic in everything but name. The friary was disbanded in the wake of the Reformation. The building's stones were carried away for use in the construction of the new Tolbooth. That is, a traditional Scottish city hall, and to repair St. Giles and its kirkyard walls. The empty land was soon repurposed as a cemetery, and some of these amazing monuments started to be built, though some were torn down, which I'll mention again later. There are still some very, very old graves here, though.
That tipped-over grey stone is known to be of someone who was executed in about 1580 and buried here after a month or more, with his head or limbs being displayed on spikes. You know the kind of thing.
I know the thing.
Yeah.
You can see that a lot of graves and monuments are built into a wall. This is called the Flodden Wall. It was built as a defensive boundary against the English around the southern part of the Old Town after the Scottish defeat at the Battle of Flodden in 1513, and we'll be visiting this wall again. The church was constructed between 1602 and 1620. Now remember, it's intentionally different from the Church of England in design and feel.
For a long time, there was a determination in Presbyterian churches to avoid anything that even hinted at Anglicanism, because there's been a huge battle to not be Anglicised, and you're sort of being a traitor to that if you allow candles or coloured windows or chanting or anything remotely. So the Presbyterian services became dreadfully plain.
In 1637, Charles I insisted that the English Book of Common Prayer be read in Scottish churches. Jenny Geddes threw a stool at the minister in protest, then sparking riots in Edinburgh. It was an age-old question echoing through this country since 1560. Who was the ultimate authority in Scotland? The Presbyterian Church or the monarch? For the next 6 months, people began to organize, and they drew up a document called the National Covenant. In February of 1638, people lined up here in the kirkyard to sign that document. It said that Presbyterianism was a community under God, not the Crown.
This building's got a stronger connection with the Covenanting times than most, because it was in this building that the covenant was read out and signed in 1638 say that that's where it was done. Long after it was all over, perhaps in the 1950s, the cross at the east end there was decorated with a crown above it. And that's a sort of rebus. Those Covenanters who died at the hands of the troop or who were arrested and tried and sentenced to 7 years hard labour overseas, Caribbean, tobacco, sugar, that sort of thing. The motto that kept them going through all of that was, Jesus Christ is the King and Head of the Church, not His Majesty. And that's what the two symbols between them sort of spell out, isn't it?
This perceived treason led Charles I to declare war on the Covenanters, ultimately leading to the civil wars across Scotland, England, and Ireland. And those civil wars, aka the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, would ultimately land Charles in some serious hot water. To put it lightly, he eventually lost his head. The church was damaged during the Protectorate, when it was used as barracks by troops under Oliver Cromwell. And then Charles I's son, Charles II, did originally agree to the covenant in order to gain Scottish support. But he rescinded his support when he gained power and came down hard on them. This is known as the Killing Time, when Covenanters were tortured and executed in brutal and horrific ways. This very graveyard was turned into a prison for Covenanters after the Battle of Bothwell Bridge in 1679, in which the government fought militant Covenanter rebels. This is one of the darkest chapters in Scottish history, and it brings us back to the Flodden Wall, which provided one of the walls of the outdoor prison. For over 4 months, more than 1,000 prisoners were held here in this walled section of the Kirkyard from June to November, without any shelter, fed only by scraps of bread, many dying either by malnutrition or execution. It was utterly inhumane. This memorial here commemorates 18,000 Covenanters martyred across Scotland during that horrible time. After this period ended, the church administration was restructured a few times, and it became a very important place for Edinburgh and the country. However, the town council started using the west end of Greyfriars as a gunpowder store, and predictably, an explosion destroyed the church tower in 1718, and it was then gutted by a fire in 1845. David Cousin rebuilt old Greyfriars with an open, un-aisled interior, and the ceiling was just replaced about 100 years ago.
It reminds me a little bit of the hull of a ship as well.
That's, the word nave for the centre of a church. Nave, naval.
Yeah.
It means like an upturned boat.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
Spot on.
Let's listen to Bert talk a little bit about this stained glass.
The Presbyterian in Scotland was plainer than it ought to have been for a long time, simply because of the determination to steer clear of anything with an Anglican hint to it. So it was 1880 before coloured windows like this got put in. 1860.
Okay.
1860. They're nice, but it's been done carefully. Not too much picture at first. Edge-to-edge picture came later, but the simple pattern ones are the earliest, designed not to arouse the wrath of the authorities.
Thankfully, the church still stands today, though it might be most famous for its atmospheric graveyard. It's always full of tourists and tour groups.
It's the season in the summer. There's sometimes 5 different tour groups in with an authorised Edinburgh guide in charge of each one. One lot at Greyfriars Bobby's grave, another lot down there, another lot here, another lot there. And the 3/4 of the stuff they tell them is rubbish, of course.
As a tour guide, I'm well aware, Did you know that identity thieves often scour graveyards for data that they can use in their crimes? It's true. But of course, they also target the living. Identity theft usually starts with your data being leaked, and then it's shared by shady data sharing companies, and then it ends up in the hands of the scammers. Go ahead, Google yourself right now. I found tons of my personal data when I did. You'll be surprised at how much of your personal data is out there, making you vulnerable to scams. Well, luckily, today's sponsor, Incogni, is here to help you hide your identity online. Incogni is a personal data removal service that automatically sends data deletion requests on your behalf. Simply put, the scammers can't harm you if they can't find you. Stop these crooks before they find you. Let Incogni seal your privacy leaks.
They do a lot of it automatically, but if you find data about yourself online, all you need to do is copy the link and drop it into Incogni's custom removal dashboard. They'll make sure it gets taken down.
Incogni offers a 30-day money-back guarantee on all plans, so there's no risk.
Go to incogni.com/museum guide or use my code museum guide to get 60% off an annual plan and see what they can remove for you. Now, let's get back to Greyfriars.
Now, let's bring up the elephant in the room, or in the Kirkyard. A lot of people are here because of the Kirkyard's perceived connection to Harry Potter. It is said that J.K. Rowling was inspired by some of the names here on these graves in order to write some of her characters, including Professor McGonagall and Tom Riddle. I will tell you that she has denied this, and it's really tenuous at best, but no shade to these tour guides. I myself have been a tour guide before, looking for connections to make good in-person tour, especially for children. I don't begrudge them for being here, but we're not going to be talking about that on our tour today.
For being quite a small graveyard, it has a lot of very macabre memorials.
Now we're going to spend some time wandering around the cemetery now. Let's go. This is the monument for Thomas Robertson, a famous builder immortalized, well, kind of, in an elegy celebrating his lifetime achievements. It's in Latin, of course, and it's very self-aggrandizing. I'll read it to you in English. Here is interred Thomas Robertson, Baillie of Edinburgh, and more just in that office. A man very dear to God, who by his virtue greatly illustrated the most famous name of Robertson, being notable for his piety towards God, loyalty toward his prince, love to his country, and civility to all persons. He was inferior to none in prudence, integrity, and dexterity in management of business. To him, as the best of husbands and most loving of parents, his most mournful wife and children, his heirs, erected this monument. Virtue survives the grave. If only I can have even a tenth of that sentiment on my grave one day.
Is that a cat? Is it a bat? Is it a cat bat? What is that? I was so surprised. I accidentally wrote a poem.
Now let's talk a little bit about some of the symbols that we're going to see here in the cemetery, such as torches. These were really popular in the 19th century, and look, they're upside down. Remember, in the world of the dead, things are often inverted. 19th century is the age of most of the cemeteries we usually visit on my channel, such as Highgate and Père Lachaise, and I'm hoping to visit a few of the other Magnificent Seven cemeteries this year. However, this cemetery, Greyfriars, has many much older graves, and so we see a lot of skulls. A lot. Did I mention it would be a lot? But while an old goth at heart like me thinks they're pretty neat, they actually served a purpose in the 17th century. They were memento mori. This concept comes up a lot, the idea that looking at a skull or a vanitas will help you to remember your own mortality so that you live a more pious and righteous life while you're here on earth. It is meant to convey the idea that you too shall soon die.
You see, you can misread it. Mm-hmm. It's not aggrandizement or pride that says, look how rich I was. It's straightforward, you are coming here too. Look, remember.
Repent, live a good life, because death shall soon be here for you.
We're also going to see some of these guys. Now, Bert told me that they are green men, and some of them definitely are, but others are so unusual. I'll point them out as we go. A green man, aka a foliate head, is an ancient symbol. How ancient is debated, found in Great Britain, Ireland, Germany, France, Spain, and even further afield. They are typically human faces with leaves, vines, or other vegetation growing from their mouth and nose. They are thought to reference the cycle of nature, death, and rebirth. They might be connected to the Celtic Church, which I talk about in my video about the National Museum of Scotland, which is, by the way, right across the street from this churchyard.
Particular order. These look quite new because they've got granite slabs, which don't weather. but these are medical people.
Oh.
Principally. If you were rich enough, doctors would be rich, you got a stone, and if you weren't, you just got buried under the grass and your name put under the location.
Just a little bit more about this grave. One of the names is James Hope, and he was a Scottish lawyer, philanthropist and campaigner. But his father and brothers were anatomists at the university. There's so much medical history here.
The graves, now the earliest ones, of course, are in Latin, because anyone rich enough to pay for a gravestone almost certainly had been to university, and because he was at university he would have been taught in Latin and examined in Latin. That goes through right to about 1750. All over Europe, Latin, the language of the scholars. And some of the Latin is really punchy. A little forward motto that we see in several different places around here is Hodie mihi tras tibi, and it translates literally to today to me, tomorrow to you. What to me, what to you? Death, of course, you can't.
Okay, this has got to be one of my favourite grave monuments ever. Mostly because the skeleton in the middle really looks like he's greedily rubbing his hands together, even though it is actually of these two shaking hands. This is the monument of George Foulis, who purchased the Robertson estate in 1620 and lived there with his wife Jane Bannatyne. There might be some relation to the Bannatyne monument we're going to speak about soon. He died in 1633, and his monument is flanked by what appears to be pregnant caryatids, perhaps symbolizing new life? Very unusual. And this masked green man along the bottom, I've never seen a masked green man. So unusual. There are loads of flowers, foliage, fruits and stalks of wheat, all symbolizing new life. And we can see these small cherubs in each top corner. They're blowing trumpets, summoning the dead to arrive. And the hourglass tells us that we need to be ready for our time to die. It's a memento mori. But the flaming lamp on top of the hourglass shows us that life will still go on without us. We can also see that these statues have lost their heads. It really adds to the atmosphere, even though it's not intentional. We can see a little skull and crossbones bound with rope at either sides of the bottom corner, showing us what will become of our mortal remains. Look at this big cherub leaning rather casually on a skull. He's so relaxed that his eyes are closed. He reminds us that while we don't need to be afraid of death, we do need to be ready for it and repent. Skulls on skulls on skulls. Let's pop over to this swirly monument. This belongs to Thomas Bannatyne, who died in 1638, and this was commissioned by his wife, Jane McMath. Little is known about Thomas, but it's believed that he was the nephew. These swirling columns are known as Solomonic columns, aka barley sugar columns. This monument actually collapsed at one point, and it was restored. Look up at the cherub at the top. Its eyes are wide open and staring into the distance. We can see a lot of similar symbolism to the Foulis monument. But there are even more details, like the skull and bones, the hourglass, symbolizing the short nature of life, and the foliage and the wheat represent new life. Look here, the skull peeking out of one of the windows. I love this. A tree grows out of the top of one of the left towers, and the other has a smoking lamp. There are also a few buildings and a large church in the middle. This is probably St. Giles High Kirk. Remember, this church, Greyfriars, it wasn't even yet built when people were first being buried here.
Walter Scott, the father, Sir Walter Scott, the father of the author, buried here. Scott himself is down in the Borders where he ended his life, but and there's a relic on one of the gravestones there of an episode in his book, Heart of Midlothian, because that was the slang name for the prison. When the Greyfriars lived in this area, they would have been practically all that the population could access in the way of medical help. They were keen herbalists, and since their departure, and quite recently, only 20 or 30 years ago, these beds of medicinal herbs and other herbs have been planted by a volunteer group. Early medicine in Edinburgh, I don't know, perhaps sparked off by the Franciscans doing their bit of herbal knowledge and helping the poor and those who fell ill. The first recorded medical group in Edinburgh Guild of Barbers and Surgeons, 1505. So the Greyfriars were still here. I think there was a bit of a division in the medical fraternity because the use of knives and things like that was and the doctors were more like apothecaries or herbalists, prescribing medicines and diet and somewhere better to live, or take the waters at this place or that if you're rich enough. And if you needed an amputation or a tooth pulling, crude stuff like that, mechanical stuff, the barbers had the sharpest knives, you see. Wow.
That is unreal.
Yeah. James Borthwick of Stow is the gentleman buried here or under there. He'd twice been deacon of the guild, so he was well respected among his colleagues, and he was the first accredited teacher of anatomy. And his gravestone, as you can see, has a full skeleton. Well, it was full when it was new. The weather has taken its toll. And the usual sort of skull and crossbones, gravedigger's implements, surgical implements. I think there's a bit of a joke in there. Here's what he worked on while he was alive, and here's what he's turning into now that he's dead. And around 1720, the guild became the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh. And I think the barbers got sidelined. You just keep on with your haircuts.
Yeah.
And we'll do. Yeah. Now, the teaching of anatomy by the dissection of cadavers was still an essential part of medical education. The old college building of Edinburgh University, the one on Chamber Street, there was an anatomical theatre, specially constructed. I've seen a picture of it. It was enormously high. It wasn't just like a theatre with each layer of seats slightly higher. It was up to a floor and a half, and the people at the top would have. I think there was queuing for the best seats, or maybe paying, and a cadaver would be dissected, and the dissector would be explaining what he was. There would be foreign students as well, who'd come from countries where the church took a dim view of that irreverent treatment of a body. So if they wanted to watch a cadaver being cut up, it had to be in the reformed countries. And Scotland was one of them. There still weren't enough bodies. They got every condemned criminal, and a lot of people were hanged for a lot of things. At first it was only murderers. Other thieves who'd been hanged were immune. But even then there weren't enough cadavers to go round, and grave robbing was a popular activity. Here we are at one of the Mortsafes. Rich people could pay for a bar enclosure over their graves like this. Some graveyards, Highgate, if it goes back that far, are going to have watchmen at the gate. How clever.
Highgate was built as a reaction to prevent grave robbers.
Yeah, and how can you prevent it? You put a watchman on, and the grave robbers maybe let the guy see a knife or something ugly and say, here's half a bottle of whiskey, just look the other way for a couple of minutes, we'll be quick and nobody will notice. And if you pardon the Latin, quis custodies custodiet ipsos custodes, who is to guard those very guards? So it's a 2,000-year-old problem. How do you make sure the guards are doing what you put them there to do? Put some guards on. Yes, but... So the body supply continued. No bother. Look around. The houses there with windows opening onto the kirkyard. A gate and a watch place that, as I say, is open to bribery. Hopeless. In 1832, the Westminster Parliament finally put a stop to the grave robbing business by awarding the anatomy schools not just the bodies of criminals who had been hanged, but also by donation or people who died in the workhouses or in prison before finishing their sentences.
Other than Greyfriars Bobby, these are the most iconic features of Greyfriars Kirkyard. As we've heard from Bert, anatomical lessons were a very important part of Edinburgh's history. And it turns out they were very lucrative too. Edinburgh's history is also closely tied to body snatching, and that'll be the subject of a future video, but I also have a playlist about body snatching in London. People were so scared of having their body dug up by resurrection men that they built cage-like tombs to avoid having their remains taken for anatomical study. There were many types of these so-called Mortsafes, ranging from iron cages to heavy stone table tombstones, concrete boxes, or even this iron coffin. There are several intact examples of Mortsafes like this around Scotland, but these two cages at Greyfriars are the most famous. A bit later on, we'll also enter into an entire walled-in kind of caged area. Now, protecting the graves was one way to respond to body snatching, but locals also formed organized watch groups tasked with monitoring activities in local churchyards. A shortage of available bodies for aspiring and practicing physicians to dissect led to an ever-increasing epidemic of grave robbing, and between 1827 and 1828, William Burke and William Hare here in Edinburgh lured in and murdered their pensioner lodgers in a scheme to provide fresh bodies to the local anatomical school. Dr. Robert Knox, a well-known local anatomy lecturer, purchased the bodies and most likely knew that something was a bit suspicious about this supply chain. The duo was finally exposed, and Burke was hanged in Edinburgh in January of 1829. His death mask is here at the National Portrait Gallery, and there is a book bound in his skin here at the world's tiniest museum. I'm going to do a video just about Burke and Hare here in Edinburgh's museums in the future.
When you think about it, maybe the Bible's full of when the last trump shall sound and the dead shall be raised. Yeah? So a lot of people believed that their body would come to life again. And God, with an infinite amount of power, could do anything. But, you know, if you're going to burn it, that's why cremation took so long to come in. Yes, of course, God can make the body again, but it's a lot of work, you know, that maybe you shouldn't have done that. And if you get chopped up on the dissection table, of course God can fix that if it has to be fixed, but you're giving him an awful lot of work. And that's probably where the church's disapproval of it came from.
Wow, this one along the fence here really looks like a medieval tomb effigy. Let's have a closer look. Oh, and a snake in front. (1606). This looks like something that would typically be inside the church.
Now, these unusual little kind of sculptures and bits, this man's face, these are part of something called the Trinity Apse. The Trinity Apse was originally founded in 1462 by Queen Mary after the death of her husband, King James II. This was a Gothic chapel originally located in what was then known as the Waverley Valley. However, with the advent of railway mania in the 1800s, this little chapel was right in the middle of the city's plans for a new railway station. And so, while a 24-year battle over where the Trinity Apse should be moved, it was dismantled piece by piece, numbered, and it was thought it would be put back together at a later time. Eventually, an agreement was reached to put the church here between Geoffrey Street and Chalmers Close in the Old Town. However, during those few decades, a few sticky-fingered individuals made off with some of the pieces. Later, the church had to be redesigned to make up for those lost segments. This portion of the wall here in the Kirkyard is made up of some of these pilfered components. I just think this is so neat.
Really interesting with all the kind of cornucopia of fruits and vegetables. These monuments along the wall are really unusual to me. I mean, normally you have this type of monument from the early 17th century, late 16th century inside a church. But because this is a Presbyterian church, and remember, the church was constructed after this was a graveyard or a cemetery, and because it was constructed in such a sparse Scottish Presbyterian style without grand monuments inside, that makes me wonder if that's why these are along the fence. They're really, really weird to see them here. I love it. Kind of wavy column.
We can see John Byrne's tomb here, built into the Grassmarket wall. He was a solicitor to the king and a wealthy landowner, born in Pickharley in 1620. This tomb was built by his surviving wife in 1684, 3 years after his death. It is really remarkable. Wow.
We can see here exactly what Bert was talking about with the Latin. If you could all sign up for my Patreon so I could live in one of these flats, that would be much appreciated.
This is by far the most famous monument in Greyfriars, the grave of Greyfriars Bobby, who was either a Skye Terrier or a Dandy Dinmont Terrier, depending on who you ask. He is well known due to several books and films, and his statue and this pub are major tourist attractions. Just look at this little sweetie. Here is the most beloved version of the story. Note I didn't say the most accurate. This is the story that wee Bobby belonged to an Edinburgh City police night watchman named John Gray. When John Gray died, he was buried here in Greyfriars, and Bobby then began to sit on his master's grave, refusing to leave. He is said to have stayed here for 14 years, although some people believe that maybe Bobby was switched out for a new Bobby, which explains his longevity. It's a heartwarming story, a dog sitting on its master's grave, and really sad.
I'm not going to lie, I would die for Greyfriars Bobby.
Now, Greyfriars Bobby died of cancer of the jaw in 1872 and was buried not far from John Gray's grave. The following year, the English philanthropist Lady Angela Burdett Coutts heard of the story. She loved dogs. Just look at her elaborate monument featuring her own dogs at St. Pancras Old Church in London. She was so charmed that she had a drinking fountain topped with Bobby's statue erected here. The statue has become a tourist destination, and everyone loves to rub wee Bobby's nose for luck. Although some locals find this disrespectful because, of course, over time, Bobby's nose is becoming worn away a little bit. Now, I'm not Scottish and I'm not from Edinburgh, so I shouldn't really have an opinion, but I am a heritage wonk, and I have to say, I do find this a bit NIMBY-ish. I mean, people are people. They rub statues all over the world, and they're going to keep rubbing the nose of this statue because it's a famous tradition. I choose to see it as endearing, not disrespectful. But if you'd like, you can buy a replica of Bobby's nose to take home with you. Edinburgh artist Denny Hunter will sell you a cold cast bronze replica of Bobby's nose, available in store at the Museum of Edinburgh. Now, here's the monument for George Watson. He was a banker born in Edinburgh in 1654 and had a long and successful career, becoming the first accountant of the Bank of Scotland. On his death, he bequeathed money to the Edinburgh Merchant Company to open a boarding school for the poor children of Edinburgh. The school, by the way, is still in existence to this day.
Just look at these unreal green men here.
This is the monument to John Mylne, erected by his nephew, Robert. He was a Scottish stonemason and architect. The whole family was.
I don't know if they're green men or vampires or bats or cats, but there's at least 4 on this grave that I can see. They're kind of like dragons as well. 1 right up at the top, and then below the cherub's wings, and then 2 at the bottom and top of the scroll down at the bottom. I mean, just unbelievable. Look at the way the writing is written sideways up and down these columns as well. That's really unusual.
Now, here is the monument to Sir Robert Sibbald. He was a Scottish physician and antiquary. He was the first professor of medicine at the University of Edinburgh, later knighted and then appointed the Geographer Royal in 1682. He also wrote books about botany and the taxonomy of the blue whale. The blue whale was once commonly referred to as Sibbald's rorqual. He really was a polymath.
I think one of the reasons why this is feeling so unusual to me is that in London, a lot of our churchyards of this age that would have had markers from the 17th century, they were cleared to make way for kind of park spaces. And our magnificent 7 cemeteries are much younger. They're early mid-19th century. So seeing these 16th, 17th century monuments, markers and graves in a churchyard in the center of a city, it's just blowing my mind. I mean, come on, look at that. This is unbelievable.
Let's talk again about the Flodden Wall. In the early 17th century, the newly built church purged some of the monuments, and big stones like these were therefore banned in the main grass area. According to the new rules, they could only be on the outer wall. That's why they're all lined up here. It's interesting. That brings us to talk about this grave, that of William Little. It was created nearly a century after his death in 1601 by his grandson, Clement Little. William had been a 16th century Lord Provost of Edinburgh. That's kind of like a Lord Mayor, and a founder of Edinburgh University. His grave was in the grass, but it was removed in that purge, and so his grandson built this here. His grave is one of the most distinctive. He's lying recumbent, propped up by his elbow, under a canopy supported on 6 Corinthian columns and topped by 2 female figures. They represent Lady Justice and Prudence.
Again, this one exactly like what you would normally find inside of a church. A tomb effigy, a human figure on top of their tomb vault, but outside in the churchyard in stone. So again, these little almost vaults, these are the answer to protecting your loved one from grave robbers, from resurrectionists, before the era of the garden cemetery that came with security guards. Now, a monument like, it's very echoey when I come inside one of these. Now, a monument like this, toppled to the ground, might look disrespectful to you, but it's actually intentional. There was a tragic death of a little boy in Glasgow a few years ago. He was playing with his friends in a cemetery, and one of the monuments fell down onto him, killing him instantly. It was a nationwide tragedy, and it sparked a big movement, particularly in Scotland, to make graveyards and cemeteries more safe so that something like this doesn't happen again. And so when you have an unstable monument, it is purposely toppled so that it doesn't harm the living. It's a really perfect memento mori there. He memento mori'd too hard. Now this one is especially safe and secure. You can see the iron cage on top, so a cunning resurrectionist couldn't even slip inside.
The Kincaid monument honours the Kincaid family of Warriston, known as influential merchants and landowners during the 17th century. The tomb features 2 carved female figures with their hands joined in prayer. Although he's not interred here, a family member, Alexander Kincaid, a former Lord Provost, was buried elsewhere in Greyfriars in 1737. Now here we can see John Kay. He was a well-known caricaturist here in Edinburgh, as well as a painter of miniatures and a barber. He lampooned public figures and politicians with his work. I love this. Many of his caricature drawings were purchased by the subject he had drawn with the sole purpose of them being able to destroy it.
Well, that's the end of our tour. I really hope that you've enjoyed spending time with me here in this atmospheric kirkyard, and that you enjoyed our tour through the church and some outdoor bits with Bert. I'll see you the next time I'm at the museum.